is what I think is kind of interesting about a really good decision process is that most of the decisions that you're making should actually be quite fast. Where I think that people go wrong is that the decisions that they go fast on, often they should be going slow on. And the decisions they go slow on, they should actually often be going quickly on.
I'm Amy Jo Martin. Welcome to the Why Not Now Show. You know that thing you've been thinking about doing? Yeah, that one. Why not now? Have you ever actually taken the time to ask yourself, what's stopping me? Let's talk it through. This is your chance to give that idea the attention it deserves and take action. Each episode, I have a chat with a fascinating person, from entrepreneurs to athletes, celebrities, my parents, rocket scientists, and all walks of life. We talk through a critical time when they've asked themselves, why not now? We dissect that day or even that moment, step by step.
Just let go.
Annie Duke is on the show today, and she is a world champion poker professional turned decision strategist. So what does that mean? She merges her poker expertise and her cognitive psychology research to create a series of different types of tools and methods that anyone can learn to make better decisions. Annie and I get down into it in terms of decision making. We are talking tactics. And hopefully you have a decision in front of you to put through this test. So have one ready as we're kicking off here, because this advice and her method for how to make decisions is extremely helpful and valuable. And we're talking step by step, if this, then that type of stuff. If by chance you have a why not now idea that's been brewing and rolling around in the back of your mind, however, you're saying, well, when XYZ happens, then I will tackle my why not now idea or get started. So we actually start off this conversation, Annie and I, and she talks about that situation where when we're saying to ourselves, well, when XYZ happens, then I will do what I want to do. Annie shares exactly what she's done in those situations and what she's learned about this scenario and how you can navigate it. Annie also talks about making quick decisions and slow decisions. She shares exactly the types of decisions that should be made quickly versus the ones that should not. And for those ones that should not, how to start breaking the decision up into different steps, kind of an if this, then that, almost like a decision tree. So this is extremely helpful because it also will save you time and it will save you energy on letting certain things that should actually be decided quickly not take up so much time and energy. You will hear Annie share a list of what types of decisions go into column A and what types of decisions go into column B. We also discuss the role intuition plays in decision making. This was a huge eye-opener for me. It was something that I have never been able to articulate, but she fully describes where she believes intuition should fall in the decision-making process and where it should not. This was good, and this actually might surprise you, what you hear Annie say, but it made a lot of sense as well. Women make up only 3 to 5% of the poker professional world overall. So as you can imagine, Annie lives a colorful life, and she does share some of the colorful stories that she experienced back in her poker playing days. I took copious notes. I hope you do too. If we're going to get good at something, we might as well get good at decision making. So without further ado, here is Annie Duke. Being able to design my own day and do it in the most efficient way is a non-negotiable for me. I'm a bit of a time management nerd. So when I find something that allows me to be more efficient and effective to get the most out of my day, I want to share it with everyone. So here's the scoop. I have a new tool in my productivity tool belt, and it's called Monday.com. My team and I have never felt more organized professionally and personally. And my to-do list is no longer the boss of me. I feel more in control because every project, initiative, date, and task is captured and organized in one place. And my team is in the loop and involved every step of the way. We are in lockstep. Monday.com is like having a brand new operating system. Everything has its own home, deadline. You can see the team members associated with the tasks, and it's color coordinated, so you can easily navigate your own task list. We all have multifaceted jobs, businesses, and lives. With Monday, you're able to keep all of these components organized in their own compartments, but you're also one click away from seeing the big picture and how they all integrate together. Creating systems and procedures within your day and business saves a lot of time. For example, my team and I have a dedicated Monday.com board for this very podcast. Did you know that there are 28 steps involved in getting one podcast ready for air? It's the same exact process every single time. And it's a system that we have put into place. So we know the various key steps are assigned to certain people, and we've mapped out the entire process from start to finish within this one board. This allows us to be streamlined. It cuts back on the amount of emails exchanged as well as the amount of meetings needed. One feature I love is that my social media content calendar is built inside of Monday.com. I finally have one that I actually use, I like, and it's embedded into my overall calendar as well. Another feature we use every single day is the Google Doc integration. You know I love a good spreadsheet. I can pull them into Monday.com and edit them right there versus having 97 tabs open on my computer, which is extremely distracting and inefficient. If how we spend our days is how we spend our lives, then I can't think of anything more important than using the time in our days wisely. Head to hey.monday.com/Amy Jo Martin to start your free trial today. That's hey.monday.com/Amy Jo Martin. Annie, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for joining me today. And let's hop in the spirit of why not now. Can you tell me about a time when you had a big decision to make and you had to ask yourself, why not now? We'll dissect that minute, that hour, that season, the day, and really understand, look under the hood of how you got from idea to action, from dreaming to doing.
Yeah, so there's actually there's two examples that I can think of, and they're both like really different, but they're both times when I can really remember actually very explicitly asking myself that question. So the first one is, I think, something that people might struggle with, which is when you're thinking, when certain things happen in the world, then I'm going to do something. Mm-hmm. And for me, I was somewhere in my very early 20s. I was probably like 22 or something. And this was at a time when like smoking was pretty normal. I would imagine this might be a problem that people have with vaping now, but that didn't exist back then. And when I had been in college, I was a smoker. So I get to graduate school, and I remember somebody asking me, what are you ever going to quit smoking? And my answer was, yeah, absolutely. Like before I get pregnant, I'll quit smoking. And all of a sudden it occurred to me, well, why don't I just quit smoking now? And obviously I wasn't planning to get pregnant for many years, but that question really hit me, and I actually stopped that day.
Oh, wow. Okay. So this is good. That's quick. But I can imagine just in your DNA, you have to make quick decisions. Like you in your career, I imagine that might be something we could dive into in a second. But tell me about that day. Like you cold turkey? Was there anything?
Yeah, I just cold turkeyed it. And I'll tell you why. It was weird. So, and by the way, I wasn't like a light smoker. Like I was a good pack a day smoker. I was like, wake up in the morning, have a cigarette, like have a cigarette before you go to bed. I just want to make that clear. It wasn't like I was like a 2 cigarettes a day person or something like that. I'll tell you what it was. And this was long before I played poker because I was in graduate school still. It was as I said to myself, well, obviously I'm going to quit before I get pregnant. What I realized is that, well, but there's no difference between now and then because it's not like I would be pregnant when I was planning to quit smoking. It's just that, I sort of have that on the horizon. And it all of a sudden realized to me that this was a silly kind of like demarcation to be making. So I was clearly acknowledging that smoking couldn't possibly be good for my health. Otherwise, it would be something that I would be perfectly happy to do when I was pregnant. And that when I actually had been planning to quit, I wasn't going to be pregnant then because I was going to do it beforehand. And I wasn't pregnant now. And I just couldn't get my mind around what the difference between now and then was. And that's where I got to why not now? Because I just realized like this difference that I had sort of made up in my mind didn't actually exist.
So interesting. And what you had said, like out of the gate, you mentioned when we have those decisions and we say to ourselves, well, when this happens, then I will XYZ. So fill in those two blanks. And even though that when factor, sometimes it's external and we have zero control. And then sometimes we may have more control, but you chose to start investing in your health early, which then compounds.
Yeah.
But yeah.
And I think that in this particular case, like, I think that when we have those decisions where we say, when this happens, then I think that very often there isn't actually a difference between then and now. Or you're setting up like arbitrary conditions for something that you clearly want to do that just actually sort of justifies a delay. And I think that we accept those kinds of things too much. Like I had just sort of accepted that obviously at some point in the future I was going to quit. And that, because I wasn't intending to be a lifelong smoker. It wasn't like I didn't know it wasn't good for you. But I had sort of set up this it felt very arbitrary for me once I sort of allowed myself to be confronted by it. And I think that happens a lot, that we kind of we'll set up these arbitrary conditions that allow us to delay doing something that's going to be difficult or that we don't want to do. It allows us to avoid things that are going to be unpleasant or cause us pain. And that's why we kind of set up those arbitrary conditions. And I think sometimes, there is something actually significantly different about the world under those conditions. And that sort of has the arbitrariness to it. But in this particular case, what I realized was that it was really arbitrary because there wasn't actually any difference between then and now. And that I was just sort of, for whatever reason, because I hadn't really allowed myself to explore it, going to continue in this behavior probably for another, I think it would have been about 6 more years or so, that like I knew was bad for me and I was totally intending to stop doing. Mm-hmm. And it was kind of like the sheer logic of the whole thing, just kind of like in the old cartoons, it was like an anvil coming down on my head. And then at that point, I was like, I couldn't justify, like I literally, I was smoking a cigarette at the time that I had this conversation because I remember it. I was walking along the street, along Spruce Street in Philadelphia on my way back to my apartment, and I was walking with somebody and I put the cigarette out and that was it.
Wow. Okay. So this is so topical and timely, especially for people listening, because it's like when we look into it, these are excuses, or sometimes I call them innovation allergies, or like you said, logic. We want to, that makes sense if I just do it before then. Like it's you're just conveniently working up this theory and this like narrative or debate in your head, your rationale. So when we strike that, when this, then this will happen, or then I will this. And if we literally remove that first half, you did that. And so given your area of study, and did that have something to do with your ability to just stop, or do you just have a lot of willpower? Most people can't just stop after smoking a pack a day. Tell us more.
That's a good question. Well, first of all, let me just say something which I kind of realized like in retrospect, and I may have realized at the time, is that I think there's a lot of havoc that gets sort of wrought in people's lives out of these arbitrary markers. And I think that it's usually time. So that's kind of the idea behind like a New Year's resolution, or I'm going to start my diet on Monday, or I guess in this case, I'm going to quit smoking on a particular day. And the reason why I think that those sort of demarcations, like the segmenting of time that we do is actually not great for decision making is that, so there's a really well documented effect called the what the hell effect, which I think everybody's experienced. So here's how it goes. I'm going to start my diet on Monday. So now let's say it's like Tuesday and you go into the office in the before times and it's somebody's birthday and they've brought cupcakes in and you mess up.
What the hell? Yeah. What the hell?
And you have the cupcakes. So here's where the what the hell effect comes in. Well, I messed up. So what the hell? And what will happen in that case is one of two things. Either you'll just sort of give up on the day and you'll just eat a bunch of crap for the day, or more commonly, because you sort of set the market Monday, you'll give up that week and you'll say, I'll try again on Monday. And this obviously happens with New Year's resolutions, right? You make a New Year's resolution. We know that almost nobody actually makes it past like the first month. And then you don't try again until the next year. Well, that's silly because you have some sort of goal in mind. You recognize that there's some habit you'd like to change or some behavior that you'd like to change. You know it's going to be hard. You set a goal. You set a start time, Monday. And it matters little that you have a cupcake at lunch to celebrate somebody's birthday. The next decision you make should be around what that goal is, as opposed to, well, I messed up, so then I just have to wait till the next Monday, or I messed up and so I have to wait until the next morning. These are things that are continuous. And you're going to have kind of ups and downs in that continuous path. But to say like there's some arbitrary time during which if I've messed up, I just have to give up for that whole time is kind of silly. And that's what I was doing with the smoking decision for sure. I sort of had set up this arbitrary, like, well, before I get pregnant, I'll stop. And then that gave me permission to not actually execute on, I clearly had a goal. I wanted to stop smoking because otherwise I wouldn't have already planned when I was going to stop. But I was like, but at this time period, as opposed to saying, well, no, but there's no difference between the Tuesday at 12:30 after you had the cupcake and the Monday morning when you decided not to do it anymore. That Tuesday at 12:30, your goal has remained exactly the same. And it should just be onward and upward at that point, as opposed to what the hell. So first of all, I think that, it's sort of in terms of like, and I talk about the what the hell effect in my book, How to Decide, because I do talk about this problem and how you might tackle it. In terms of why I was able to do that, I don't know. I feel like a lot of it is just kind of like how you're built in terms of that kind of thing. Because there's all sorts of stuff that I can think of in my life where one day I just decided, well, that's dumb, and I didn't do it anymore. So, I think I'm sort of built for like sticking to like commitments that I make or something like that. Which may be why, like, obviously, I went really deep on poker and then I was really deep on cognitive science and things like that, sometimes to a fault, I would say. So that could be part of it.
Would you say you're, I'm constantly learning this top life lesson of mine of when to push on the gas and when to ease up a little, like when to make things happen and when to let them happen. It's slippery slope for me at times. I'm getting better in life. But would you say you have a very strong will? Like you can make things happen out of sheer will. And was that a moment where you're just like, yeah, this is absolutely it. And you just made the decision and you do that enough and you know what you're capable of, I imagine. And then that kind of grows.
I think that's probably true. And then I think the other thing for me is, so now I'm going into all these weird, deep places. Now I feel like this is a therapy session, which is so great. So, okay. So there are certain things about the way that I grew up that make me get particular boost to my sort of identity. So one of the things, and I talk about this in my book, like a lot of the decisions that we make are around kind of like creating a positive self-narrative. So a lot of the things that we do in life are about like moving that narrative forward in a positive way. But people get that kind of positive feeling from different things, right? And there's often like a battle. So you can imagine like eating a cupcake makes you feel pretty good. But then obviously in the long run, you don't feel so good. So there's a battle between like what you want now in terms of like that boost, that good feeling versus what you want in the long run. So for me, I've always been someone who in particular really gets a lot of value out of doing some things that I know are really hard, particularly hard for other people. So I'll give you an example. So I actually suffer from panic disorder. Which is different from, so people know it's different than generalized anxiety disorder. It's like very big spikes in anxiety, but you don't necessarily have anxiety all the time. So you're not necessarily like an anxious person. You have these really big spikes that are really kind of hard to handle of anxiety. So it's in a different class than than anxiety disorder. But anyway, I've had that since college. And one of the things that can really trigger it is public speaking. So this is something that really can get my panic going. So I can really start to panic when that happens. And that just has to do with like some physiological feedback loops when you're kind of like your adrenaline's going, and it can trigger some of these panic reactions. So I'm a public speaker as a living.
Right. You do.
And
you seek those hard things, those black diamond,
Yeah.
difficult mountains.
And my husband has said, like, if I had some of this stuff going on with you, like I would never choose to do that for a living. Like, what is going on? Why do you do that? And it's literally like, because it's hard, because I just really don't want to give in to the kinds of things that might block my way. And so I actually will specifically seek out things that I think are going to be super difficult and scary for me. So I imagine
is that how poker like surfaced in your life, or was that different?
Yeah, so poker is kind of an interesting thing in terms of how I got into that. So I was in graduate school and I was going to go get a tenure track job. I had done 5 years. That was why I was walking along Spruce Street in Philadelphia, because I was in graduate school. And I actually got sick. So I had been struggling with like a chronic stomach thing called gastroparesis. And it's one of these things where it can be like sort of in the background, and then you'll have a spike where it's a really bad episode of it. And I was experiencing a very bad episode of it. And at its worst, when you have gastroparesis, you actually can't keep food down. So obviously you don't feel very good. So I actually ended up in the hospital for a couple of weeks and had to delay going out for my job talks to try to get this tenure track position. So I was going to have to wait a year to do that. And that's when I started playing poker, actually.
More kind of
So,
a hobby, like a pastime, or was it more?
So it wasn't as a pastime; it was a way to make money. So my brother had already been playing, and honestly, it was just I needed something that had really flexible hours, and I didn't want to start a new career because I was still planning to go into academics. So it was something for me to be able to make money in the long run. I mean, in the short run. That wasn't so strange because I had my brother as a coach who was quite good, and I started winning right away because I was playing against people in the place that I was playing. It wasn't like, some kind of really super high stakes game. And it was people that just with my brother's coaching, that was kind of enough for me to be better than the players that I was playing against.
Interesting.
So I started kind of making money right away. And then I realized that I like really loved the game, but there was an aspect of it actually to what you're saying that I think in part made me stick around, which was that poker is a game where only about 3% of the people who play are women, at least at the kind of professional level, 3 to 5%. So I was, particularly where I was playing, which was in Montana, by the way, I was basically the only woman ever at the table, and there was no HR department. And so while there were plenty of totally lovely people who I absolutely adore, there were lots of ones that I felt the opposite of that about. And there was a lot of not just sexism, but a lot of sexualization. And the other thing is, so again, remember there's like no HR department, right? So imagine being like a 60-year-old rancher or whatever, and a very young woman, I was in my early 20s,
It's very
comes and
good.
sits at the table and beats you in a hand and takes your money.
Mhm.
And you can
There's a
imagine what
lot
that dynamic
packed
is.
into that. Yeah, psychologically and emotionally and
Yeah.
pride and
So
oh wow. So do you think you maybe sought that out because it was it was perceived to be difficult and
yeah, and maybe a little bit to a fault. Like it was like, I got called a lot of words that I wouldn't say in public. I got propositioned a lot, and then also just people being really angry at me. It's like, when you're losing real money, there's a lot of emotion around that. And who are you going to direct that emotion at? You're not going to direct that at the 6 foot whatever guy, over in the corner. You're going to direct it at someone who can't really fight back. And that was kind of what my position was in that situation. And I think that's part of what, it's like, okay, then I'm going to show you, So
fascinating. Yeah, I can totally identify with that. And I think a lot of people can too, but coming from, growing up in Wyoming, rural Wyoming in a single wide trailer and then making my way and career into professional sports and the NBA, and usually the only woman in the room, but I realized I was usually pressing from a place of trying to prove something. A bit of chip on my shoulder, right? And it was just difficult. I tend to seek difficult things too, I think. But anyway, I think so many people can identify with that, especially women. And it's so interesting.
I never actually connected that stuff together. So that was super interesting. I feel like I just had a therapy session. That was
Oh, wow. Well, I mean, it's amazing how you've been able to talk through and weave all these parts and different stories. And yeah, I'm definitely not a therapist, but thank you for being open to going there. And now, and looking at, your career path and what you do now as a retired poker player, but even before poker, you had this whole different path and journey. And here you are, and there's a lot of impact and purpose. And it feels like maybe you're pressing from a place of purpose now and a different potentially, I don't want to put words in your mouth, a different vibe with that. Yet, like with your book, Thinking in Bets, when you look at your decision making process and how you navigate your life, would you say that you're pretty good at making quick decisions? Like because you somewhat had to in that setting?
Yeah. So this is what I think is kind of interesting about a really good decision process is that most of the decisions that you're making should actually be quite fast. But where I think that people go wrong is that the decisions that they go fast on, often they should be going slow on, and the decisions they go slow on, they should actually often be going quickly on. And I think that the skill that I have is sort of knowing the difference between the two. And I think that partly comes from poker, right? I have the ability to sort of calculate out what I think the best path is. And do that really fast in the moment because I have to. There's time pressure. But then I understand when to slow down. And like in retrospect, as I'm sort of looking through my decision process in a game to figure out when should I really take my time with it and really try to deconstruct that decision. And then you can take that into decision making where you can take that time in advance. So, the issue is in poker that I don't have a choice, right? I mean, I just have to sort of figure out what I'm going to do in the space of a minute. And so everything has to be pretty fast. But again, you still have to have some taste about what you linger over in retrospect. And then that actually informs some of the larger strategic decisions that you might be making going into the game. So, there are some overall strategies that you're going to be laying on top of the play of any individual hand. And those you really are taking your time on. And you're doing that kind of in between games. And then you're kind of collecting data as you're sort of testing those things out within the game. So there's this fast and slow balance that occurs. So I'll give you an example of where I think that people kind of get this reversed.
Yes.
A lot of times when there's a decision that you really should be taking a lot of time on, something like, let's say that you're interviewing a few job candidates, right? People will often make that decision pretty quickly. It's just like they'll like someone in the room a lot and then they'll just go with it, right? Without actually stepping back and taking some time to think that through. But we all know these people, right? In the before times when we used to sit in restaurants and order off menus, the average amount of time that somebody spends on a restaurant menu is something like 14 minutes.
Oh my goodness. That's exhausting.
But haven't you
Yes.
eaten with people like that who are like,
yes, I totally see it. And don't get
They
it.
ask
But
every
yes.
single person at the table, what do you think?
Don't get
They
it.
ask
But
every
yes.
single person at the table, what do you think? They want to know what everybody else is ordering. They're asking the wait staff. And then when it's time, the wait staff comes over to take the order. They're like, come to me last.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, oh my gosh. Yeah. So, and is it because it's not a high stake that the risk is not, there isn't much, but like would be buying a house or moving to a different city, go slow? Is that what you're kind of saying? Like,
Yeah, that's right. There's two things that you want to consider when you're deciding about how much time you should take on a decision. And this is separate and apart from the problem that I had in poker, which is sometimes there's a time limit, right? So as an example, if you take too much time deciding whether to offer on a house in a hot market, by the time you figure it out, the house is probably going to be sold. So putting that type of problem aside, which is just sometimes there's external restrictions on your time. The two things you want to consider are options and impact. So on the impact side, it's what's the impact if I get this wrong? And this is the really different frame for thinking about it. So I think that what generally slows people down in this sort of chicken and fish decision, like, should I order the chicken or the fish, is that you're going to get an answer right away. And when you don't like your dish, we automatically think it was a mistake, which it wasn't, because obviously you don't have a time machine and you haven't, I assume, tasted that chicken or fish before. And so all you're doing when you say, I want to have the chicken versus the fish, is that there's a higher probability you'll like the chicken than the fish, but there's no guarantee to that. So that means that when you get it back and it isn't any good, you couldn't have known that in advance. So it doesn't mean it's a mistake, but we immediately feel like it's a mistake and we feel that regret. And so what we're trying to do is reduce the chances that we feel that regret, that we feel like it's a mistake. But that's not the right frame to look at it through. The appropriate frame to look at it through is, so I'll do it with you, right? So let's say that we eat in a restaurant and you're an agonizer and you finally decide, okay, I'm going to order the chicken, and you get the chicken and it's terrible. Mm-hmm. And now I see you a year later and I say to you, hey, Amy Jo, remember that meal we had a year ago when the chicken was really bad? And you're like, yeah, I totally remember that. And I say, so that bad chicken, how much of an effect did it have on your happiness now a year later? I think the answer is none.
If I even remember, but yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What if I catch you in a month and I say, how much did the bad chicken have on your happiness today a month later?
Nada.
What about a week?
As long as I didn't get food poisoning, I'm pretty good.
So what that tells us is that we've got the wrong time horizon when we're thinking about the decision. We're thinking about it in that moment. I'm going to really regret that I, messed up or something, instead of thinking about really what's the long-term effect on your happiness. So that's problem number one in terms of impact. Problem number two in terms of impact. So that what that tells you is that it's a low impact decision. It doesn't really matter. The other way that you can think about impact is when the potential impact of either choice is identical. So this would be a case where it really actually is going to matter to you in terms of your happiness. So as an example, if you go on a big trip, like a big vacation, and the vacation doesn't work out well, and I see you in a month or a year, probably did have an effect on your happiness. And that would be the same if you're deciding about what job to pick or something. If it doesn't work out in a year, it will have actually affected your happiness. But this should feel familiar to you. A lot of times what happens is that we've narrowed down our set of choices to two or three things. So let's just call it two. So let's say, again, this would be when there's not a pandemic raging, that you've decided you've got it down to Paris or Rome, mm-hmm. right? Or there's two houses that you love, or there's two great job opportunities and you need to decide between the two of them. So what will happen to people in that situation is that they have a lot of difficulty deciding, and it will be very hard for them. They're spending all their time on TripAdvisor. They're asking everybody's advice about the jobs, or they're going back and forth and they keep waffling and changing their mind on which house they actually want to offer on. And then they're worried that they're making the wrong choice and whatnot. But here's the interesting thing about why that decision is so hard. And I'll just I'll show you how that is. Let's say that the choice were between a vacation in Paris or a vacation in a meatpacking plant. Would you have any difficulty with that decision at all? No. And the reason is that those two options are really far apart in what their potential is for this positive impact that they have on your life. So it's very easy to split them, to figure out which is which. When it's between Paris and Rome, or two great job opportunities, or two houses that you love, what's tripping you up is that given what you know, they're actually pretty identical. The chances you're going to have a great vacation in Paris are the same as the chances you're going to have a great vacation in Rome. And the chances you'll have a bad vacation in Paris are the same as that you'll have a bad vacation in Rome. Same thing with the two jobs and same thing with the two houses. And the way that you can figure out that they're like basically identical is to apply something called the only option test. All right. So you basically say, if this were the only job opportunity that I had, would I be happy with it? And let's say the answer is yes. And then you go to the other one and you say, if that were the only job opportunity I had, would I be happy with it? And if the answer is yes in both cases, what that means is that it's basically past the threshold of something that you think would work out well. And you can't actually tell the difference between the two because that would require a time machine, right? You'd have to be able to look into the future and see which one actually worked out better. So these are what I call sheep in wolf's clothing decisions. That they look really scary, but they're actually not, because what it means is that they're so close to each other that whichever one you choose is probably about the same thing. And it's sort of this big decision principle, which is when a decision is hard, it actually means it's easy. So it's the very fact that you're caught between the two. So just apply the only option test and that should help you with that. So that's the other piece. And the third one that has to do with options that helps you figure out if you can go fast or not has to do with how easy it is to quit the thing you're doing. So this is classic dating versus marrying. You shouldn't actually spend too much time thinking about who to go on a date with because you can quit. You don't have to marry the person.
So like giving yourself an out, like how easy it will be to get out of it type thing.
Yeah, exactly. Like, first of all, in a date, you can get up in the middle or you can just never go on a date with the person again. Right. So in that particular case, you should actually just date a whole bunch of people and like gather a lot of information for when you have to make the marry decision, which is actually very hard to reverse. So you want to spend a lot of time on the marry decision and not hardly any time on the dating decision. So it's like renting versus buying, for example, or, internships, right? Assuming that you have the ability to do a bunch of different internships when you're in college, you should do a lot of different internships. Because it allows you to kind of like date the job system, if that makes sense. And you don't have to take any of those. They're not permanent decisions. They're really easy to unwind. It's the same thing with entry-level positions, right? Like it's easy to leave an entry-level position and get another one. It's easy to unwind that. It's not a big deal. This would also be true for people who like, if you have a really amazing CV, such that there's lots of job opportunities available to you, you should be more willing to take an opportunity that looks really interesting that may not work out. Because even if it doesn't work out, if you have a great CV, you'll be able to get to a different option. You'll be able to go find another job. So essentially you can think about it as the more you know that you're going to have options available to you in the future that you could change your mind and switch to, the less you should spend agonizing about whether to go for the cool opportunity that's sitting in front of you.
Love it. It's like it's safe enough to try because you
have a safety net, right?
Yeah.
So it's not in that case more like dating and less like marrying. Like if you don't like the person you go on a date with, it's not like you can't go swipe left on another person, or right. I don't know. Is it swipe right or left? I've never actually used the app.
I haven't either, and I'm okay to be in the club that hasn't. But
I've never. So I don't know which way you swipe, but whichever way you swipe, it's easy enough for you to swipe that way.
Exactly. It's a thumb move, not a life change. Okay, so I've heard the analogy, just like with your book, talking about life being more like poker versus chess. And what you just described, like with two options that they look pretty darn similar. What you don't know, you don't know. Can you talk to me a little bit about that in terms of there is an element of unknown, and I don't know if you even use the word luck, but with life being more like poker versus seems like with chess, there isn't a lot of surprise, or you can premeditate more.
Yeah. So, okay. So there's two really big differences between chess and poker, both of which you just touched on. One is the luck element. Poker, obviously, there's a really strong influence of luck because I don't have any control over what the next card the dealer is, deals is. So I could, have a hand where the only way that I can lose is that the queen of clubs comes on the last card, and there it is.
Right. You have zero control over that.
Yeah. And all I know is that that's going to happen 2% of the time, but I don't know when I'm going to see that 2%. So by definition, 100 times that I'm in a situation where I'm going to lose 2% of the time, I will lose 2 of those. And I don't know when those 2 are going to occur.
Interesting.
So that's the element of luck. That's just like a random thing that acts upon you. Now, notice that isn't a very strong influence in chess. Not in the sense of like you roll dice and snake eyes is a check. But, if you roll a 7, you get an extra queen or something, like there's no, which you can see like in backgammon, you have the dice element, right? So that makes it different than chess, because you roll dice and then that actually determines what the possible moves are for you and kind of partly what happens to you. So we can take that out in a game like chess. So the other big thing that exists in poker, but actually not in backgammon or chess, is hidden information. So I can't see my opponent's cards. And that's kind of what I'm saying about like the Paris and Rome thing, or the 2 great jobs, or the 2 houses. There's just always going to be unknowns. And some of those things you might know you don't know, but like you can't afford to get them because you don't have time. Like the house might go off the market before you actually decide. Mm-hmm. And that's part of the reason why we do inspections and stuff like that, to try to get more information and inform our decisions better. But then there's also going to be things you don't know. Mm-hmm. So as an example, like you might not know that the house, like at 2 a.m, your neighbors actually like to throw ragers. But you don't know that because you never went to the house at 2 a.m. And then that would just be sort of like, okay, I didn't know that. What am I going to do? Mm-hmm. And in poker, you can see that, right? Because I can't see my opponent's cards. And we've all had that feeling of after we've made a decision and we learned something new, if I only knew then what I knew now. And that's that feeling of hidden information, that new information revealed itself to you. And if I'd known that at the time, I would have made a different decision. And that's always going to happen to us when we're making decisions where there's uncertainty of that type. Notice that doesn't exist in chess. There is kind of, if I only knew, because you do know, you can see the whole position, at least as it relates to the pieces, right? There are things that you don't know about your opponent, like what openings they like or what responses they might make, but you at least know what the possibilities are. Mm-hmm. So I know, like, if I move my piece here, then here are all the places that my opponent can move. And then here are all the ways that I can respond. And if anybody's watched Queen's Gambit, that's what she's doing right now. Yes. That's what Beth is doing in her head when she plays those games out, because she can see the whole position. She can sort of explore all of those possibilities. So you can see it's sort of the like, we can put backgammon in the middle of poker and chess. So chess is like, I can see the whole position and nobody's rolling dice and they're, having some sort of random element affecting where those pieces are. Backgammon, I can see the whole position, but there is a random element that influences the moves. And then in poker, you have both. You don't have complete information about your opponent's position because I can't see their cards. And there's a random element of the deal of the cards. And that's why poker is actually a really, really good model for human decision-making, because you can think like even something as simple as going through a traffic light. We can see how we have these influences, right? So there's just like random luck, like your tire blows out, or here would be something, here's something that you wouldn't know necessarily. What if the light is broken? And so when it's green on your side, it's also green for the people coming from the other direction. And you just don't know that.
Right. It's just the information. It's hidden information, or
right. It's just hidden information. Right. So even something simple like going through a traffic light has hidden information and luck. So imagine when you start to get to more complicated things like who to hire. Should I take this job, or should I go, where should I go on vacation, or whatever? You're always going to be deciding without 100% certainty. And you want to get really comfortable with that.
Oh, and it's interesting because a mentor of mine once said, and he was very successful in business, and has this philosophy of 99% of the time that, well, maybe it's not 99, but he did say 99. When he does something or starts something, what he thinks is going to happen and what actually happens is different anyway. So he knows he just needs to get started type thing. So we spend so much in that analysis paralysis mode, especially with entrepreneurship. And especially if it's your first time, there's even more hidden information or unknowns. And so as I think about this, poker seems to be a lot like entrepreneurship in that you don't know what's in front of you and how this is going to play out when you haven't even created the thing yet.
Yeah. And I think the other thing to realize, kind of speaking back to what your mentor said, is that one of the things you need to figure out is this something that I can solve through just sort of thinking about it and modeling it? Or is this something where I actually just need to ask? So an example that I like to think about is comedy. So in comedy, I can sit at home and try to like design and refine a joke. But that's not nearly as good as going and telling a joke in front of an audience.
Like the answers are on the street. The
The
feedback
answers
loop.
exactly.
Yeah.
So, and there's some things where you can really model it out, and there's some things where it's better to ask. And that's also true, by the way, not just of figuring out how other people are going to respond to whatever you're doing, which would certainly be the case in product development, right? I mean, that's kind of the idea behind minimum viable product is stop.
Totally.
You used to spend 2 years trying to like design and refine before you ever released it into the world, but you were missing this opportunity to actually get the information that you needed, which is how did users respond to it?
Exactly.
And you want to, now people have figured out, you want to do that as quickly as possible because that helps solve the information gap, right? That we're deciding we can't see the other player's cards. There's all sorts of stuff we don't know. And if we can just start to iterate more quickly, then as you said, the answer's on the street. I can get those answers more quickly so that when I do decide to do the big rollout, which is going to be a big thing, and it's going to be more like marrying, that I've gotten all these questions answered along the way. So that's other people's preferences. But here's the really interesting thing. There's a whole bunch of stuff we don't know about ourselves and our own preferences. I think we have the intuition that we know ourselves really well, but we don't. And there's a really simple way I can show you that. If there was some food, some dish that I had created that you had never tried before, and I'm assuming it doesn't have a disqualifying ingredient in it. So for me, like eggplant would be a disqualifying ingredient. Don't tell me that you make eggplant in a way that I'm going to like it. I can tell you I won't.
Yeah.
So as long as let's assume there's not eggplant in it for me.
Non-starter. Yeah.
The non-starter. But assuming there's not a disqualifying ingredient in it, how am I supposed to know if I like it without trying it? And so it's not just true for foods. It's like, I can't really know if I'm going to like a particular sport unless I try it, or I'm not going to know if I like playing piano unless I try it, or that I like doing art unless I try it, or, so on and so forth. Like that's sort of what dating is, right? I'm not really sure who I'm going to like and who I'm not. And so I need to date a wide variety of people to try to figure out what do I actually like? Because a lot of times our intuitions about what we're going to like are actually quite bad. And I think that we've all had that experience of, man, I really thought I was going to enjoy that. And it turned out that is just not my jam.
So fascinating. It's like even thinking of the approach back to the MVP or even the mentors, Tony Hsieh, the CEO of Zappos, and he would always encourage me, get it to beta as fast as you can. Just like down and dirty so you can start iterating and get that feedback loop. I mean, a couple of things you've said, he always says too, most people misdiagnose what will make them happy, which is kind of what you were just alluding to.
So it's both things, right? So he's got both of those covered. Like we're pretty bad at our own preferences.
Right.
And so a lot of times you just have to try stuff to figure out what is it that you like.
Yeah. Experimenting. I work with a lot of women leaders, both executives and founders, and constantly encouraging them to date ideas, to flirt with them. I don't know how many times I've had an idea for a business or product and I need to date it to see if I even want to double down, because my tendency is I'll go real quick, real fast in a direction. And then you spend all this time and energy and it's like, shit, I actually didn't want to do that anyway. So I need to flirt and date to even see if I want to pursue it, right? To conserve some energy.
Yeah. And then the other thing that I would add to that is that even when you do find something that's really working for you, you still need to do some flirting and dating on the side. Not if you're married. I mean, I'm not talking about a personal relationship here. But, let's say that I find out that I really love a particular sport and I am going deep on it. It's good for me to try out other things on the side even so. For one thing, it may make me actually execute on the thing that I'm going deep on better just through that exploration and trying to figure out like what works and what doesn't work with that. It actually informs the execution of the thing that is your main thing. But the other thing is that sometimes you find something in that set of things that you're exploring that actually is better than the thing you're doing. So what can happen to us a lot is So there's something called like a local minima. So there's different ways that you can visualize it, but imagine that there's a whole bunch of different mountaintops and you've climbed to the top of one. So you can see that you're in a pretty good spot because you're at the peak, and you just can't see that if you went down again and back up, that there's a higher peak there. So unless you're really fully exploring the landscape, sometimes you can't see that there's even a better thing that you could do, or something that would make you happier, or whatever it might be. And so I think that's why, like, it's really important to explore those other things. You can think about it like, if all I'm doing is listening to the White Stripes, then I might be missing out on other music that I might also like.
Total, like those blinders can.
Right. And that's not to say, like, particularly for entrepreneurs, it's really important to go deep.
And focus. Yeah.
But some of that exploration of other stuff actually helps the thing that you're going deep on get better. Like, that's the other thing, is you need to understand, like, you don't always end up down those paths, but having explored those paths a little bit is actually a way to go deep on the path that you're on.
When we look at, let's just say, time management. So back in your poker days, and you don't even have to apply this question to that, but I'm just kind of thinking of you got a minute. What are some of your best time management tips? I mean, some of this decision-making process for sure could be applied, but productivity and time management in general.
So, basically, I would say that my main tip for time management, and this is generally true for a lot of different things, is that we're very bad decision makers generally when we're faced with the decision right then, right? So, for example, if you think about, like, say, for me, as an example, like, I say yes to things too often. So, and I know that even though I can step back from that and say, I say yes to things too often, that where I really break down is when the opportunity comes my way and it looks kind of like an interesting thing to do. And then I just have this real, like, default setting of yes, and it's a bad thing that I do. But I think there's all sorts of things that are like that. And you can explore whatever those things are for yourself. That when, you can think about this, like, from a dieting perspective, we're all pretty good at saying, I want to eat a healthier diet, but we're pretty bad when the cake is right in front of us. Right. So it's like that immediate temptation. We can see this actually with decisions about COVID a lot, right? That you kind of know, like, in the long run, if we avoid, social contact or whatever, that's going to be good for us in the long run. But man, Thanksgiving's really tempting. And it's hard when you're actually facing down the decision in front of you. You have that project due, but Queen's Gambit is on. So anyway, you can identify for whatever those are for yourself. But one of the things, and I think this allows you to be much more productive, is to actually, when you're not faced with a decision, figure out where are the places that I think my decisions are likely to go wrong, where I'm going to overcommit, or it's going to eat into my productivity because I know that I'm going to spend too much time on, I'm going to be interrupting myself, answering every email or whatever it might be. And then figure out what are the things that I can do in advance. First of all, how do I want to actually think about breaking my time up? How do I want to allocate my time? So I think about that. How much time do I want to spend writing? How much time do I want to spend teaching? How much time do I want to spend on my consulting business? How much time do I want to spend with my husband? Because I recognize I'd like to spend all my time with my husband, but I can't because I have stuff to do. So I try to, first of all, figure that out when I'm not faced with an actual decision. I try to step back from it and think about, like, what's the proportion of stuff that I want to do? And then what I do, and this is just called a pre-mortem, it's something I apply a lot, is I say, let's say I fail at that. I actually don't. I overcommit. I don't save enough time for, like, personal things that I want to do. I'm working more than I want. I'm getting distracted too often. I'm saying yes to too many things. Whatever it is, I say, let's imagine it's the future and I failed. Why do I think that happened? And then once I figure out why I think that happened, then I can set into place, well, what are the guardrails that I can make, right? So for some people, it might be blocking out time in their calendar, saying this is time I can't touch. So it might be something simple like that. Mm-hmm. For me, I actually have someone who handles my bookings, and I have been very clear with her about how much I want to work. What does something have to do in terms of jumping over the hurdle to make sure that she's not actually bringing me opportunities that I've pre-committed to saying no to. So like I've decided almost in advance. Yeah. So basically it's like a pre-commitment contract. So I've said, okay. There are certain things that there are opportunities that I will say yes to, and they're in this category. There are opportunities I'll say no to. And then here are the things that would be on the border. And we've talked about that in a really intentional way. So the ones that I have an intention to say no to, she doesn't show me, because I've told her what the features of those things are, because I know if she does show them to me, I'll probably say yes.
Yes. You're taking away the tendency or the whatever.
Right. So they just kind of get sorted out in that way. Another way you can do it, obviously, for somebody who's like me, like a consultant, is that if I know I only want to spend a certain amount of time on my consulting, I can price accordingly.
Mm-hmm.
So I've done a lot of sort of in that sense of like, you have to find out what people's preferences are. I've done a lot of experimentation with pricing to try to figure out what's the point at which I'm neither getting too much work or too little.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm very intentional about that. And so I fool around with it a lot, and I'll quote different prices to different people just to kind of to road test it.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'll settle in on a price. And then, and then I also recognize that sometimes that changes, right? So, sometimes it turns out that price doesn't screen out enough people. And so then I'll raise it, or sometimes the economy will slow down or something like that, and then I'll lower it. And so I'm always sort of running that algorithm, but I'm never doing it when I'm faced with with a particular opportunity right in front of me. I do those sort of in advance of those decisions, and then I set those structures up. And that's the best way for me to get kind of like the right time management, the right amount of productivity, that kind of thing.
So good. So interesting. And the pre-mortem too, as just kind of to wrap us up here. One of the questions that's burning that I have for you is into where intuition comes into your decision making. So if you would have asked me 5, 6, 7 years ago, what does your intuition say, Amy Jo? I would have been like rolling my eyes, like, should we get out a magic 8 ball? Like, I love spreadsheets, numbers, data, give it to me. But I've realized actually we do have this, science in us, and there's data. So I'm thinking back to your poker days, but just in general in life, how much do you rely on your intuition, and how do you listen to it? Like, what does that mean to you?
Yeah. So here's the issue with gut and intuition, is that it's not really a decision tool. So if you think about what is a good tool, like let's think about a screwdriver. I know what the purpose is. If I use the screwdriver appropriately, I can expect to get the same result every time I use it. And that's actually really important. I can show you how to use it so that you could repeat exactly what I'm doing. And then we can look back and examine whether I used it well. So can you do any of that with your gut? No.
It's like a random number generator. You never know what's you're
not going to get the same result every time. So we know that like decisions are really noisy, and you can see that, for example, with judges in court. And this is actually in the upcoming book Noise, which is by Danny Kahneman, Cass Sunstein, and Olivia Siboney. And people should get that. If they like thinking fast and slow, they should pre-order that book. But that, like, when you look at judges, they'll give you different, when they see the exact same case on, a rainy day versus a sunny day, like their judgment about what the sentencing should be will be different, because there's a certain amount of intuition or gut that's going into that you're not really stepping back and examining. And it means that your decisions are quite noisy, that they differ from day to day. Well, that's very unscrewdriver-like. So we shouldn't like that. Right? Because we're trying to build bureaus. I mean, that's what we're doing with our decisions, right? We're trying to build something that's sturdy and effective and isn't going to fall on you and fall apart and all that. So that's number one. Number two is how satisfying, like if you're on my team and you say, how did you come to that decision? And I say, well, it was a gut decision. Does that help you in any way? Am I improving the quality of the decisions on my team? No, because I can't teach you how to use the screwdriver. Right? I want to be able to teach you how to do it too, so that the whole team's decision-making gets lifted up. And then the other problem is, again, just that, like with the screwdriver, I can't look back and I can't say, well, what was the process there? Like, let me dissect the process and figure out, did I use the screwdriver properly? Because again, your gut is kind of like a black box. So here's where your gut makes sense though. When you're thinking about, for example, what are the things that you want to test? Well, your gut is going to give you some ideas, right? You're going to have some intuitions about what you think might work. I have intuitions about what foods I might like, or what television programs I might like, or whatever. And that tells you what to test in two ways. One is that you should test some things that your gut tells you would like, and then specifically test some things that your gut tells you wouldn't like. That's actually a really important piece that most people miss. So if you think you're like a high school quarterback type of person, you should make sure that you date some computer people or some data people or whatever, because you want to sort of stress test what your gut is telling you. So in sort of the what are these sort of tests that I'm making of the world, your gut's going to be pretty good in terms of figuring out what paths do you want to actually explore. Specifically, the kind of like, you can think about it, the paths that you think would be productive, and then sort of the anti-paths, the paths that you think wouldn't be productive. The other place where your gut can be very helpful is when you do get it down to Paris and Rome. So I think about the difference between the sorting process for decisions and the picking process. So the sorting process is I get to things that satisfy the only option test. In other words, they've satisfied some sort of threshold. That means that this is an option that I think is going to, is probably going to be pretty good. And then beyond that, I don't care if you use your gut. Or flip a coin, by the way, or ask somebody else to decide for you. Like if I say, I can't decide between the chicken and the fish, Amy Jo, will you pick for me? Okay. Or I can just go with my gut and say, my gut tells me the chicken would be better. But the point is I eliminated the eggplant.
Yep.
Right. Like I got rid of the things that weren't going to work. So it's not that I don't think that there's a place for intuition and gut. And then the last thing I think is that sometimes you'll go through a process that's mathematical or kind of algorithmic, and there's going to be something that doesn't feel right about it to you. And I do think that you should pay attention to those signals, because that's a signal that you should go back and look at the process. But notice that that process itself is what you're examining. So you're not saying, my gut says maybe there's something not right here. And you're not just like automatically accepting that. It's a cue to go back and do a process dive and really start questioning the data and stress testing it and doing premortems and things like that. So sometimes your gut's going to tell you like, this, I know this is the answer that this came to, but it doesn't quite feel right. So let me do a second round of it. Mm-hmm. Now, sometimes that will still get you to the same answer. And you'll realize like sometimes our gut is pretty bad at math. We know that. But, it can be a really good cue to go back in and take another look.
So interesting to apply that to investing too. There's so many different applications and worlds that you can apply to it. Small, like lower risk as well as bigger. And that's what's so cool is you can try this stuff on like smaller things. Well, thank you. And to just wrap us all up here, Annie, imagine, okay, let's say you're walking down that street. Did you say it was Spruce Street, I think, in Philly? And if you could go back and say something to yourself in that moment before, you ended up kind of switching gears and having that gap year that created this journey into poker, what would you say to yourself?
Oh, gosh. That's just a really good question. I think there's a few things that I would say that I probably should be saying to myself today as well, but I'm a little bit better on it. I think one is that this idea of like, there's lots and lots of information in the ways that you mess up. And so don't ruminate about those. I think that I kind of ruminate in the ways that I mess up. And it's not that obviously in order to be a good poker player, you have to be very good at extracting the lessons from those things. So I think I'm good at learning the right lessons from them, but I'm still beating myself up that I did something that failed in the first place. So, and in particular, I think I would say like, don't stress the small stuff. Like it's okay. I'm a person who like my husband describes it as like, I love getting like, I want everything to be a test and I want to get an A. I am much better about it than I used to be. But I would try to tell myself to like work on that a lot earlier than I started working on it, I think. Because when you set yourself up that way, you just end up failing a lot. It's just really, it's like, and the thing that I think is kind of interesting for me is I don't hold other people to that standard in any way, shape, or form. When other people mess up, I'm the first person to be like, you're totally human and you didn't know. And I've got all this, I'm totally allow all these people, around me to like this freedom to like fail and mess up and learn from it and get better in a way that I don't know that I allow myself to do. Mm. But the flip side of that is that I can put a cigarette out and never pick one up again. So, everything it's like, I think about the mix of like dark and light, mm-hmm. So totally. That is the flip side of that is that I could just be like, okay, I'm done. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Oh, because it was a test. I wanted to get an A on it.
Yeah.
Right. Like, so how do you get an A on quitting smoking? You actually don't smoke.
Right. But like you said, the mining of the lessons and the gold in that, there are just the gifts of being able to learn and accelerate your process and progress of learning in the future because of them. you wouldn't be able to do if you didn't have them. Interesting. Oh, this has just been lovely. Thank you so much. I could keep talking for hours. And yeah, I appreciate your time and wisdom.
Thank you so much.
Hey everyone, thanks for listening to the show. Hit me up on social media to let me know what you think. I'm at Amy Jo Martin on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And I want to hear your Why Not Now moments so I can share them on the show. Just send me a note to whynotnow@amyjomartin.com. For show notes and other offers, you can visit amyjomartin.com/whynotnow. And while you're there, don't forget to sign up for my email newsletter for exclusive content and announcements. A big thanks to Rock Salt Music for all of the tunes by the talented John Coggins. And of course, a hat tip to Richard Brewer for editing and producing the show. I'll see you next time. And until then, why not now?